welcome to an episode about natural light on portraits, and we cling to the 50mm approach in this episode too. Be sure to sign up for the channel so you get a notification every time I put up a new video, and subscribe to the newsletter. There will be free presets to download. You will get a newsletter about photography, stories behind the photo, offers on workshops and more. But first of all, let's dig into portraits and using natural light. In this scenery, I have set up artificial light to lit up the scene so you can see me, else it would be pitch black. Black is in the evening, so there would be no light if I didn't put up light. So for some occasions when there's no light, I use artificial light, but I never use a flash, never, not in daylight, not in the night. I simply dislike the expressions of flash. I think it is too harsh and it is disturbing the subject you want to photograph. And maybe you have a different thought about that, and that's fine. If you like to use flash and big studio flash, go ahead if that's your thing. But what I want to teach you today is how you approach photography, portrait photography, using simply natural light. And why that? Because I like the way natural light influences the scene. I try to take advantage out of how it reflects or bounces back from a wall, how it is diffused through a window, how it lights up a scenery in a natural way and not something I have control over. And we have talked about that in earlier episodes, not having control over the scenery or what happens, or limiting yourself to free your creative mind. I know not everybody will agree with me on this subject, but that is how I work. So I don't try to teach you how to do it, but how you can do it. That's important. I use a 50mm lens for most of my work because that gives me a sense of what I'm doing. It has a natural approach, it has a natural view. It's like when I view things with my own eyes, that's almost give and take. The same way the 50mm or 43mm lenses, focal lengths, are reproducing what is seen through the glass and captured by the camera on the digital sensor or on film. It's almost the same as how you view it with your eyes. Natural light comes as an attachment to the natural view on the 50mm lens expression, because natural light gives you the same feeling as if you were present. As soon as you use a flash, you make an artificial environment. You make the natural scenery into something else, and there is nothing wrong with that. If that's a style and an approach that a photographer wants, then go ahead. But I like the way natural light impacts on the scenery, on the person in the room or in the environment outside, makes a natural look of that person. Instead of setting up artificial light trying to impact that, I prefer that natural look. Of course, that gives me some challenges, because I have to walk around and find the best angle, find the best light in the scenery, which leads to the same approach that I learned from when I shoot street photography. Is actually the same, just put into the way I shoot portraits. Finding a good scene is about the light, the same thing when you have to find a good spot for a portrait photo. Finding good light at the streets to make a good scene and a good capture is the same technique I use when I search for a good scene to make a portrait. First of all, I'm not only searching for how the best light hits the face, that's the most important thing, of course, how it lights up what is the main object for the photo, for the portrait, but I also try to include some of the environment, if it is indoor or outdoors, because that adds something to the story. It's easy enough to go close up, have a shallow depth of field, setting your aperture down to 2.8, 1.4, depending on the lens you have on your camera, and then blur everything out in the background. That's easy enough, because then you have selected your subject, put a distance to what is behind. But for me, there's more to that. I want to include some of it. So even when I shoot wide open on a lens, a 50mm lens with a very shallow depth of field at 1.4 with the Summilux lens for my Leica M9, then I still incorporate what's behind, exactly as when you see me here. I have the lens on the video camera here nearly totally open, so I diffuse what's behind me, so you're looking more at me than at the things behind me, but you still recognize there is an old film camera here at my left, your right. There are some pictures in the background, but they are not the main attraction. I am, of course. So that's the point of shooting wide open, but still including things in the area around. Of course, you can open up narrow your lens down to 4 or 5.6, then include the environment behind the person, include that to the story or to the environment to make it more interesting. But then you also have to be very careful about what's behind the subject, so it doesn't take away the story from the main character in the picture. So when we go back to the light have the same effect like depth of field. If it is a shallow depth of field or a wider depth of field where you see more, light can do the same. If you only have light lighting up the person and having the background dimmed down, then you get the attraction on the main character. But you can also do it the other way around. You can have more light in the background, have it diffused by having a wide open lens, and then let the light play on the subject, and this way get the attraction on the subject. Light does another thing too. It also depends on where you are in the room. If we are talking about rooms, you can have a window putting light on me here, and then it makes a huge difference if you move around the subject. So if I'm on the side, the same side as the light comes in, which we normally are told we should do in most photographs, having the line behind the camera to lit up everything so it doesn't go into like silhouette shooting up against the light. There are tricks to avoid that. Then you will have a normal, well-lit situation, which is good, but there can be an advantage of moving to the other side, shooting against the light, as long as there is reflecting light on the shadow side of the person. Because if you have no light at that side, then the person will turn into silhouette. And if that's not the effect you're going for, but you actually want to see the person, then you need some light at that side to lit it up. But most environments, you will have reflecting light. Light will bounce from the walls. If we have dark walls like here in this room, the light will not bounce around. Then it will be eaten up by the dark surface and will be dimmed down. So if there wasn't any light sources around me, I will look black at my neck and at that side if I only had one light source in front of me. But this is a room with many windows, so in daylight I will have light through the windows. It will hit the ceiling of the room. That will make the light bounce around and wander around in the room and make a different situation where some things are lit more up where the light is hitting directly and less at the back, but we can turn that into an advantage if we move the object and the camera around. So that is what I'm looking for when I do a portrait. When we are talking light, I look at the different situations where I can, if I want to do that, place the person I want to photograph. Then I can move around searching for the best spot. Be sure there is some distance behind the object and the wall, for example, so it isn't a flat picture. As soon as you have some distance between the camera, the object, and the background, then you begin to separate the subject from what is distracting or what is behind, and adding depth and interest to the picture. You can also include more or less in the picture depending on how the light lights up a room or a scenery outdoors. And what I go for is to include something that not necessarily tells a full story about the person, but something that adds some environment and in this way impacts on the way we look at the subject, at the person in focus. And another thing is, I don't try to mess around with a lot of stuff when I do portrait shoots. I actually try to use the same technique I use when I shoot street photography. I'm doing some small talk, I let people be in the mood they are, and then I silently, or at least as silent as I can, move around discreetly, taking different pictures, searching for the best light, and testing light from different directions. So it's not like I settle just for one direction. I try to move around, take a few shots from there, then I find a new spot, testing that out, different framings, different light, different focal lengths in between, and then I find what shoots best for that shot and select afterwards what works best. But the light is everything. If you have hot sun on a summer's day, or especially in the winter here in Northern Europe, where when we have direct sunlight from a clear sky, there's no damp in the air because it is not heated up, it's very crisp and clear air, then the sun will be really harsh and the sun will be low at the horizon, and that can make some really hard shadows, which can be used for an advantage, or it can ruin the image. What works best is always something in between, I find. When we have a little bit diffused light, but strong enough to add some character to the environment we're in. So if it's indoors and we have hot sun, like on the photo I show here from a very big room with a couple sitting and talking, then I simply used the bouncing light from the floor and the ceilings, wandering around the room to lit them up, and accepting that some of that light is really hard on some places and then softer at others. So it's a balance between what looks artistically good and what works technically. If it is outside, a cloudy day where the sun is diffused, the light of the sun is diffused a bit, will give pleasant images. And if there's direct sun, then try to move into the shade from buildings where you have bouncing light from either the walls or windows on that building. Try to search for all of that and try to look at it every time you are anywhere. I always look at light when I'm going to a cafe, and have done that since more than 35 years ago when I started photography. Every time I walk into a cafe or a building or on the street, I look at the light and how it acts. If it is cold or warm tones, if it's hard or soft, I try to notice that. Remember it in my brain, as little as it might be. I try to remember the sceneries where the light were good, and then I recall that when I find a scene again where the light is like that, and I know I can use it. So it's about getting used to notice light, not just walking around blindly, but actually begin to notice light, how it hits a wall, if it changes the color of the skin on a person, how it can be lit, a person can be lit from two sides because the main light comes from one side and then is bounced back from a white wall or a different light source. It can be artificial lamp in a room, in a cafe, that lights up the other side of the face. Try to look at that and how it appears. And then when you begin to photograph, you will notice it changes, especially the colors can change, because the camera doesn't have the same ability as our eyes and our brain to translate the light and what we see into something that is more pleasing, because we're able to balance the difference between darks and highlights unless they're really extreme. The dynamic range of the camera is much smaller, therefore you have to notice what you see is different from what the camera sees. But try to notice light and how it works on a subject, and use that creatively for your portrait photos. So light is everything in a good portrait. Of course, the expression and the mood and everything you talk about with the subject, or if you just observe them, will make the mood of that scenery. So I also try to talk in a way where we are not approaching that I'm actually taking photographs. So I'm talking about anything else that has nothing to do what we're actually doing in most cases, to make people relax and to make them feel comfortable and to make them sit or stand in the light where I want them so they look best possible. Quality of light depends on the light source. The camera can do to a certain extent, it can capture the light, but it cannot change the way the light comes in. The light is what the light is. So if it is really bright day, you have different kinds of reflections from the skin. And if people are sweating a little bit on a summer's day, you will have reflections on the skin depending on how hard the light is, or if there are white walls bouncing on that sweaty skin, that will make a reflection and make the face look less good than it will if you try to turn the back to the light source, let the subject stand or sit with the back to the light source and have the bouncing light from what was behind being the main light source instead of that. And that light also can separate the subject from the background. So both light and focal length and aperture will help you to isolate the subject and have the main attention on the subject, although you may include some of the room. In the beginning of this video, you watched a little introduction with an old man on a scrapyard walking around, and everything there was done with a light present. It was a really cloudy winter day, and there wasn't much light when we talk about the strength of the light. It was a very cloudy and a little wet day, but it made a scenery of interest. So I just searched for the spots where the light hits, and then that determines how I can make the photograph, how I can frame it, and how I can shoot it. And we have to accept that natural light that dictates what you're able to do unless you begin to putting up flash and everything else. But I will not be able to make a natural and peaceful and honest portrait of this old man if I didn't accept the light present at the spot. If I began to use flash on such a person, I'm pretty sure he would back off. He wouldn't look relaxed. I wouldn't have the same contact with him because the camera and the flash would take all the attention away from our conversation and being present in the scenery. The use of natural light on portraits is, of course, kind of a challenge, but if you look at pictures made this way, you will see a difference from pictures made with artificial light. For me, that makes a difference that I appreciate. You don't have to agree. If you find another way of shooting portraits and it works for you, go that way. I just want to tell you about how natural light can make really pleasing photos, and it will make people relax more when they are not having all the attention on equipment surrounding them. So with my small Leica M here, I can be more silent, I can be more discreet, I can be more present, and using natural light is part of that workflow, at least for me. So I hope that gives you a little inspiration to use natural light, begin to look at it, search for it, and begin to practice and see what happens if you move around a subject, taking pictures from different directions, and see how that changes everything. So I hope that was inspiring, and if you want to know more, you can sign up for the newsletter. You can sign up for my workshops around Europe. Taking part of the classes will help you understanding more of light, because we will practice that, both doing street photography and portraits when we walk around, search for better light, and we can improve the way we do photographs. So thank you for watching.